People rarely announce how much they value you. Instead, they show it in small, consistent ways, or in the quiet absence of effort. If this reflection resonates with something you've lived through, take a moment to sit with it and continue listening. By the time you reach your 50s, something shifts, not suddenly, but gradually, almost imperceptibly. You begin to see patterns that once felt normal, conversations you carried, efforts you made, silences you tolerated. And slowly, a realization forms. Many of your relationships were never truly mutual. They were sustained by your presence, your patience, your willingness to give more than you received. In earlier years, you may have called it loyalty, or love, or simply responsibility. You showed up even when it was inconvenient. You remembered details others forgot. You checked in, forgave quickly, and gave people the benefit of the doubt again and again. At the time, it didn't feel one-sided. It felt like being a good friend, a supportive partner, a dependable family member. But with distance and maturity, something becomes clearer. You begin to notice how rarely the effort was returned. There were people who only reached out when they needed something, but never just to see how you were. There were conversations where you listened deeply, yet when it was your turn to speak, the attention faded. There were moments you showed up during their difficult times, but when your own life became heavy, they seemed unavailable. At first, these things felt like coincidences. Life gets busy. People have their own struggles. You told yourself not to expect too much. But over time, the pattern repeated. One of the quiet signs of a one-sided relationship is emotional asymmetry. You care more. You think more. You invest more. Not because you are asked to, but because that's who you are. And while generosity is a strength, it can also become invisible to those who benefit from it. Another sign is how problems are handled. When tension arises, you are often the one who initiates repair. You smooth things over. Even when you were the one hurt, you choose peace over acknowledgement. And gradually, this teaches others something unspoken. That the relationship will continue, no matter how little they contribute. There is also a subtle imbalance in curiosity. In mutual relationships, people want to understand each other. They ask questions. They remember your answers. But in one-sided dynamics, your inner world remains largely unexplored. Not because it's unimportant, but because they've grown used to not having to look. Then there's the silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that reveals absence. The kind that appears when you stop initiating. When you decide just once to wait and nothing happens. Days pass, then weeks. And the relationship, which once felt stable, quietly dissolves without your effort holding it together. Some people discover this not through conflict, but through stillness. If you step back, who steps forward? If you stop giving, what remains? At some point, this realization becomes difficult to ignore. If you've ever paused and wondered which relationships in your life felt quietly unbalanced, you're not alone, and you're welcome to reflect on that here. What makes this awareness more profound after 50 is not just the recognition itself, but the emotional clarity that comes with it. You are no longer trying to prove your worth. You are no longer chasing validation in the same way. You begin to understand that mutuality is not a luxury. It is a basic requirement for a healthy connection. And yet this realization can bring a quiet grief, because it means acknowledging that some relationships you once valued were sustained not by shared effort, but by your willingness to carry them. It means seeing that what you thought was closeness may have been convenience for them. This is not about blame. Most people don't intentionally create one-sided relationships. They simply settle into patterns that benefit them, especially when the other person is consistently giving. Over time, this dynamic becomes normalized, expected even, and you, perhaps without realizing it, became reliable in a way that required nothing in return. But something changes when you begin to value your own energy differently. You start noticing how certain interactions leave you feeling drained rather than supported. You recognize when your presence is appreciated only in moments of need, not in moments of peace. You become more aware of how often you adjusted yourself to maintain connections that were never equally held. And slowly, your behavior shifts. You pause before saying yes. You speak a little more honestly. You allow silence to exist without rushing to fill it. And most importantly, you begin to observe, not just what people say, but what they consistently do. Because after 50, time feels different. It becomes less about maintaining every connection and more about honoring the ones that feel real. The ones where effort flows both ways, where you are not only needed but also known. This doesn't mean your circle becomes larger. In fact, it often becomes smaller, but it becomes more honest. There is a quiet dignity in no longer overextending yourself for relationships that do not meet you halfway. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You begin to understand that being kind does not require being available to everyone. That being understanding does not mean accepting imbalance indefinitely. That love, in its healthiest form, includes reciprocity. And perhaps most importantly, you realize that your presence is not something to be given endlessly without recognition. It has weight, it has value, and it deserves to be met, not taken for granted. As this awareness settles in, your relationships begin to change. Not because you forced them to, but because you do. Some people will notice the shift and respond with more effort, more presence, more care. Others will drift away quietly, as the dynamic no longer serves them. Both outcomes bring clarity, and clarity, while sometimes uncomfortable, is a form of peace. If this reflection gave words to something you've quietly understood, consider sharing it with someone who might recognize the same pattern. Focus Theory thanks you for listening and being part of this reflection. There is a certain calm that comes with no longer chasing connection, but instead allowing it to reveal itself. After 50, you begin to see relationships not for what they promised to be, but for what they consistently showed themselves to be. And in that quiet understanding, you don't become closed, you become discerning. And that changes everything.